Hi, my name is Gretchen, and I am so excited to be here with Pearl today. I've been waiting a long time to have this conversation with her. So buckle up, kids.
Hey everybody, this is Pearl Chiarenza, and I am so excited. We have had a little hiatus during some stuff happening in life, like planning a wedding, our amazing retreats that we just got back to. And I'm excited to come back to our show with an amazing guest that you just heard the introduction. So buckle up, because we're going to sit back and we're going to have a great conversation with Gretchen Schoser, mental health advocate and co-host of Shit That Goes On in Our Heads. And we can all relate to what goes on in our heads. Turned her journey through depression into a mission to break mental health stigmas. Through humor and honesty, she shares her story, creating safe space where listeners feel seen, understood, and reminded they're not alone. Gretchen, welcome to the show.
Why, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay! I'm so happy to have you. I remember when you and I had a conversation. I mean, I get your emails every week or every day, whenever they come out. I love reading your emails. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show is because we had a real conversation, a fun conversation. I think, if I remember right, we talked about paranormal too. So we had a lot of fun. So I'm excited to have you on the show to have this conversation. But one of the things I like to do is talk about that Shiro story. And I know that one of you shared your Shiro story. And so I would love to have you share with us that story. What brought you from where you were to where you are today? And, we all start somewhere in our life that leads us to what we're doing today. Like, for instance, myself, I always wanted to be a teacher growing up, but never really went to school to be a teacher, but here I am coaching. So I am teaching in just a different way. And so would you share your Shiro story with us today, Gretchen?
I sure will. So my Shiro story starts in a very dark place. The last quarter of 2022 was probably the hardest quarter of my entire life. A lot of shit happened. My wife got shingles. I decided to take an early retirement. I hit a deer. I got catfished. A good friend of ours passed away. My father-in-law passed away. You throw in a little bit of seasonal depression in there, and then you throw in some holiday depression. Christmas Day rolls around, and I was just done. I had wanted to go for a drive, but it was like minus 22 here. And I went out to go start my car, and my car wouldn't start. And that really was just the last straw. I came back into the house, and I didn't even tell my wife I was back. I went right upstairs and I cried. I didn't know what to do. So I picked up the phone and I called 988, because at that point in time in my life, I just didn't want to live anymore. I was done. And at the time I was 59 and a half. And I was always taught that, you don't talk about your mental health. I'm an extrovert through and through and an empath. And so I did a really good job of hiding my depression from everyone. And I picked up the phone and I called 988, and that call saved my life because I was truly I just had it. I didn't have any place else to turn. I couldn't find my voice. I couldn't find my footing, and I was terrified. And the cool thing about that conversation is the woman on the other side of the phone was the most compassionate woman I've ever spoken to in my entire life. And she literally talked me off the ledge. I didn't really have a plan, but I knew that I just didn't want to be around anymore. So after that phone call, and I'm going to say there were a couple of things that really helped me through that day. Number one, the call to 988. Number two, that glimmer of hope that things would get better. I didn't know how. And at the time, I couldn't foresee anything. And the fact that my wife was home, right? Those three factors are the reason I'm still here today. So the next day, I contacted a therapist. Been going strong now for 22 months. I started to share my story on social media because I didn't want people to feel as alone and as terrified as I did. And being an extrovert, I needed my friends, right? I needed them to push me back up because I couldn't even hold myself up. And then I would call and talk to my co-host. So at the time, my co-host was my manager. We use that term super loosely because I retired like 3 months later. But we'd been friends for 7 years, and we would call and laugh every single day. And so I found that my two healers were sharing my story and laughing. And so one day during our conversation on the phone, laughing about something super stupid, she's like, "Hey, let's do a podcast." And I was like, "Yeah, let's do a podcast." So that was on January 14th. We dropped our very first episode on February 14th, 2023. And the reason we chose that day is in 1997, I had buried my mom, and I wanted to change the trajectory of that day. I wanted to make it a happy memory and not a sad memory like it had been. We dropped our first episode by March or April. We already had over 10,000 downloads. And as of today, we have 800,000 downloads, and we're listened to in over 60 countries. And so I took all that pain and that hurt and that depression. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago if any of this was in my wheelhouse, it wasn't. But I really feel that my breakdown was a catalyst for me to find my higher purpose. And in every conversation we have on the podcast is we want to normalize how we talk about mental health, because there are so many people out there suffering every day and they don't have a resource. And I always make sure that I bring up the number for the suicide and crisis hotline, because that is such a vital number. Not enough people know about it. And it's not just for suicide. It's for any type of crisis. You can text or call that number in the US or Canada. And in worldwide, you can use findahelpline.com. And they give you all the different crisis lines across the world. I have never in like a million trillion years been so... I'm happier now. I'm happier than I've been in 20 years. I'm also healthier. But I never thought that we would be where we're at today, right? It was scary. It was really, really scary. And like even today, it's still scary, right? Like we had no idea. We were like, oh, we're going to do 3 shows and we'll be done. We are on episode 89. And we are now booked through July of 2025 with guests. And we're helping people every day. One of the really cool things that happened out of this is, so I retired in April. I had already secured a new job in December, but they wanted me to enjoy my retirement. So I didn't start my new job until July of 2023. When my company found out I had a podcast, they started listening and they asked me why I went back to work full time. And I was like, well, mama needs insurance. And so they offered me 30 hours a week and full benefits so I could continue with my passion project of the podcast and still work. And to this day, we get excited. We get excited with every new episode. And we just found out 2 weeks ago, September 30th, we found out we were the 2024 People's Choice Award for Health. And another thing that was not in the wheelhouse, we didn't nominate ourselves. I'm not sure who nominated us, but it was really cool because I was in a room full of my entire company. We had been in Boulder for a company event. And so I had my earbuds in, and when they rolled the credits and said that we won, I about had a heart attack. I was shaking so bad. And my chief people officer, I had about 15 people around me, and they're like, you really deserve this award because we are saving lives. We're making a cognitive effort to get those conversations out there. And like, we haven't talked to any celebrities. It's normal, everyday people that have gone through some of the hardest things that they've ever had to go through in their life. But they all feel so much better talking about it, right? It's one thing to do it face to face. And a lot of people get scared with face to face conversations, but you put somebody behind a microphone and they just open up. And we've had so many people reach back out and say, thank you. because they felt like a weight had been lifted off of their shoulder. And that's kind of how I felt when I started sharing my journey. And I'm in the process of writing a book about my experience because I'm an extrovert. And one of the things that like I want to say is if you have friends that are extroverts, check in on them because we are very, very, very good at hiding our depression. Nobody knew how depressed I was. My wife didn't, my family didn't, my coworkers didn't know. Nobody knew. And so it was terrifying for them. So, a simple conversation of just like, hey, how you doing? That goes a really long way.
Oh my gosh, you touch on so much. I like taking notes and everything over here. I've got all kinds of notes. I feel like the first time we talked, I'm like, oh my God, there's so much great information. First of all, I'm glad that you went in and you picked up that phone call because I listen to your show and I listen and it's so empowering. And if you weren't here, and it's like what I say to my clients when I coach, we're here for a reason. We don't know what that reason is, but there's a reason, right? And you decided to you picked up the phone and like you said, the things where you made the call, there was a glimmer of hope and somebody was home, right? So you didn't feel alone. And that's what if you're listening to us today and you feel like, you need to make that phone call, please pick up the phone and make that phone call and reach out to somebody because you're right. The extroverts, they are the ones we need to check on because we hide it well, right? We can hide it really, really well. And letting somebody in, it's like, oh, I don't need to let anybody in. I've got this covered. We think, right? And so I love that you remind everybody to check on their extroverted friends. And I love, your Shiro story is, I wrote down like, the big thing I take away from that is you reached out for help. And now what you're doing is you flip the switch. Now you're helping others. Now through your sharing your story, through the guests you have on, through what you guys are doing. And now to get this award, it just cements in that what you're doing is so important. And, just recently, I mean, I live in Florida. We just went through a second hurricane in 3 weeks. My son got married in the middle of those two hurricanes, believe it or not. We pulled off a wedding. We weren't hurricaned or shut in. But through all of that, you and I've talked before, and the listeners know, I lost my son 2 years ago in a tragic car accident. And I've watched some of his friends, unfortunately, not be here anymore because of actions that they've taken either on themselves or they chose to partake in something that was fentanyl laced or something. And just recently, I found out one of his friends had passed away like the day after the storm. We didn't even have power up. I literally got in my car and I drove to his parents' house because I know where his parents live. And the mom wasn't home. She reached out to, we've talked since then, but the dad was home. And he's like, you just heard, didn't you? I'm like, oh my gosh. I was like, I just heard. And one of the things, like him and I were sitting there talking, and as I was leaving, he said, one of the we talk about things people say to us when we lose somebody, right? And one of the things that he said, his coworker said was, well, he was just hanging out with the wrong people, the wrong kids. And he said, some of those kids were hanging out with my son. So am I the wrong people? Like we both had that conversation and we're like, yeah, our boys hang out with each other. We're not bad people. It's just that there's mental health issues in this world and we're not talking about it enough. We're not addressing it enough. We're not having good, deep conversations about it. And even I was talking with somebody earlier today about the fact that we missed the boat during COVID on making sure while we're all shuttered in, why didn't we have something on the television about mental health? Why didn't we have more experts? Why didn't we have something that was, somebody stepped forward? Because now we're watching these 11-year-olds get access to things like guns and making choices that you look at and go, why is an 11-year-old doing that? Well, that was 4 years ago. That 11-year-old was what? 7 years old, that they were sitting home in COVID and had nothing to help them cope. We forgot to take care of that mental health piece. And I'm glad we're having this conversation because self-care for me is really important, which also goes with mental health. And that's why I am a mental health life coach, because the things we sabotage and judge ourselves within our brain, if we don't work on it, it can take over our brain. It can make us feel like that's the reality and that there's no hope. And what you did, Gretchen, and like making that phone call, it's so important. And I'm going to say it again. If you're listening to us, make that phone call because we know there's good things to come, even though in the middle of what's happening, it doesn't feel like it. I remember at one point, Matt used to say to us, I don't think I'm going to live past 25. And I'm like, don't say that. Like, don't put that in the world. And he did pass at 25. It's like, sometimes I even question myself, what did we miss? But we did. We had every resource that we could think of there. But like you said, he was an extrovert too. Like, are we checking on everybody? Not just the extroverts, but definitely extroverts, because we can hide it well. But check on that friend. If you haven't talked to somebody, and every July, that's why we also do, Gretchen, we do Make the Call for Matt, because 2 weeks after Matt passed, he had 2 of his friends show up at our doorsteps, stopping by just to say hi to Matt. Didn't know he'd passed. So check in on your friends, make that phone call, because life is short. We don't know what's going to happen. And I'm so excited that you sat down and thought you're doing 3 shows, and now here you're on your 89th show. I mean, and I know I'm booked sometime. I think I'm booked in February. You guys are like, you guys, if you need to listen, we're going to put all the links in here to go listen to the podcast. It's a great podcast, and sign up for the email. It's great information too that comes across the email. I love getting your emails. But to talk to us, like, yeah, we make the phone call and everything. What is some of the work that you really had to do to, it's not like, make the call, it happens overnight, right, Gretchen? What's some of the work that, you had to do to get you to where you are today?
The first thing I needed to do is I needed to put up some boundaries, because I'm an empath, right? So I'm so used to like fixing everybody else's stuff, but not fixing my own. I'm like, oh, you got a problem here. Let me help you with that. And then ignore myself altogether. So the first thing I did is I put up some really strong boundaries. And, if it smells like drama, it has to pass through the box first. Like, is this going to benefit me? What am I going to get out of this? Am I going to get pulled into the rabbit hole? Those are all things that I ask myself. And then I needed to really focus on my self-care and self-love. And yes, those are buzzwords right now, but they are so important. So important. You need to take care of yourself first. And so one of the things that I do is I go out and I ground myself outside. I live in upstate New York. So, 7 months out of the year, I can actually go outside without having to put a jacket on. And I, stand in the grass. I ground myself. I enjoy some nature. I write. I've done a lot of journaling. Like, I never used to write. Now I write all the time. I've written a couple of really cool articles, and, and I take better care of myself. I had speed date my therapist before, and that's my advice to everybody is speed date your therapist, because that first one may not be the one for you, but don't give up, because there's so many other modalities out there. Like, I've done a little bit of energy healing too, and some EFT tapping, which has been phenomenal. And I really put the work in. I knew I had to put the work in, because there wasn't an easy button to fix all the emotions and all the stuff that I still had sitting within me. I mean, I still, to this day, I do have small battles with depression, but I have better tools now. And like, my first thing for anybody is, if you're an extrovert or an introvert, take care of yourself first. And that first step is setting boundaries. I wish I'd had that same advice 20 years ago, because my life would have been so much better. But at 61, I can say that, I really stick with my boundaries. And the other thing I worked on, I still work on, is I don't give energy to something that I am not going to benefit from. If it's something that really is going to make me angry, it doesn't get me more energy. Like, I will leave the door open just a crack so that they can come back into my life. But I don't have time. Life is short. And then I learned something while we were doing our podcast. So we had a guest, her name was Bookie. She had terminal breast cancer. She passed away a month after we recorded with her. But she told us so that's for the moment. So, and
Gretchen, can you repeat that? Because you just broke up. What did she say?
she said that she didn't have a bucket list, but she makes every day count. So she makes those memories every day. And that's what I do is I make those days count. I don't have a bucket list anymore. I'm 61. I hope I live till I'm 80. I don't really want to live past that because, a whole other barrage of things come in order, like depends and other things, which I don't want to deal with. But, she made sense. Like, make every moment count because, as Pearl said, you don't know what tomorrow brings. So make those moments count. Pick up the phone, call your friends, call your family, talk to your coworkers, be nice to people. And I'm telling you, it costs nothing to be kind. Nothing. Because you absolutely have zero idea what's going on behind somebody's inside somebody's head. So just be kind.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, I don't want to go down politics route, but I saw this post the other day about I want to talk about the being kind for a second. There was, I don't know, it came across my feed somehow. I don't know who the person was. I couldn't tell if he had purple hair, his hair was but he was like, tell me, if they don't vote this certain way, you need to disown them. I'm like, why are we doing this in this world? Like, this is be kind, I'm like, can we just be like, if they don't agree with you, they don't agree with you. Don't throw them underneath the thing, like, it just blows my mind. I'm like, what happened to today when we just voted for what we did and we didn't have these, this such separation, and you said be kind. I thought to myself, I think I even said out loud, can you just be kind? My husband looked at me, he's like, what? I'm like, oh, it's something I'm watching. Just don't worry about me. But it was just like, this day and age where we are in, we're so much with all this outside noise, but we forget what's happening behind somebody's door. And it can be overwhelming and scary. And I just like, it's like you said too, like, I love like what you said about not having a bucket list. Like, we're living each day and finding something in the day to be happy with. That's so important. When I work with my clients, that's the first thing we work on. The first 6 weeks, I tell them it's going to suck because you're going to give me 10 things that bring you joy. And you may think you know the list, but I'm going to challenge you on your joy list. Right. And people typically can give me like 3 things, but then when I want 10, they're like 10, like they get all freaked out with it. And, they like finding that. But I want to talk about boundaries because it's interesting you brought that up today. I am big on boundaries. I told you how my son just got married a couple weeks ago, and we're having a challenge with a family member that we're helping another family member out that's related to them, and they were not abiding by my boundaries that I set for myself, and it was overfalling for my husband as well, like even towards my husband, and I just looked at him and I said, "Here's what we have to do. The next 10 days, I want to enjoy this wedding. I don't want this noise. So I'm blocking." And he's like, "Well, I'm going to block on my phone too." And I'm like, "Great." And I literally sent her a message and I said, "Just so you know, we're blocking you right now. You can't get a hold of me. You can't get a hold of Chuck." And she's like, "You're just blocking, Chuck didn't block me. You're blocking him." And I'm like going, no. And the thing with boundaries, and I'm helping my cousin right now. She's in recovery for alcohol. She's newly, like, I think she's on maybe 45 days or 60 days. And the first thing I said, I go, you're going to have to set boundaries. You're going to have to set boundaries around who you hang out with. You're going to set boundaries around what behaviors you want around you. Set boundaries around the people who are close to you, whether they're your siblings, your aunts, your grandma, whatever they are, family. You have to set boundaries around them. I go, and the thing is, when you set the boundaries, be prepared because they will do everything and anything they can do to break the boundaries because they know the boundaries is about them. And she's like, no way. I'm like, yes. And as she's setting them, she's come to me and said, wow, you were right. Like, they're really trying to break down I go, absolutely. I said, and I told her a story about me divorcing my parents. I said, I divorced my dad. My dad, did some things to my son when my parents went through the divorce. He said some things. My mom had these tin cans, and my son was, I think he was in middle school, and he was hanging out with Papa for the summer. We didn't know he was starting the plan to file for divorce. So he was selling my mom's tin cans, and when my parents were divorcing, we were there trying to help my mom pack up her house. And she's like, I can't find my collectible tin cans. And Matt would leave the room and come back. And finally he comes in and he just has this breakdown. Will you stop worrying about the tin cans? I'm like, what the heck was that about? Well, come to find out, Papa was trying to sell Grandma's tin cans, and he said, Grandma's going to be upset. You're selling her tin cans, because he knew what they meant to her. And so those things that we put on our kids and we say outwardly, that they affect other people. And then later on, I found out, I tried to mend fences with my dad, and he moved in with us, and he was doing things to my son that were basically racist. And I was like, I can't, that's not acceptable. And then fast forward, my mom, did some things as well, trying to help take care of her health. And her and a family member decided they're going to try to do some things that would be detrimental to my family. And I was like, I'm done. I'm out. We've been a family of four pretty much our whole almost 40 years of marriage. We're good, the family of four, and having little vacations with other family. And so having boundaries is so important. And, when you're setting boundaries, Gretchen, I mean, like even for you with boundaries, it's not just around people, but it's also, I feel like too, it's around what behavior. I like what you said, the energy. If it's not going to bring you good energy, it's a no. And I like that you do that. Where do you find it's hard to do that in setting boundaries? How do you do it? What do you rely on when it's a hard one? I'm a recovering people pleasing addict. I know, trying to say, you were saying earlier, I wanted to please everybody. I don't want to let anybody down, right? And at some point, we have to, like you said, we have to pour into our own cup. And at some point, when we stop pouring into our own cup, that's when we lose sight of who we are. And so when you go back and you realize that it's important to pour in your own cup and you're setting these boundaries, how do you react? And what are some of the tools that you do to identify the energy? Like, is it a good energy or not? And then talk to us, because, one of the things I get a lot of times too from my clients is, well, I can't say no without feeling guilty. I'm like, if I'm going to give you $1 million right now, you're going to say no. They're like, oh yeah. I'm like, okay. So every time you say no, think you're winning $1 million, So how do you work through that when you have those challenges?
So for me, when I have to say no, and there's truly an art to saying no. And for me, I'm further along in my career, and I think it's easier for me to do that now than it was probably when I was in my 30s and 40s. But you have to put yourself first, right? Is this going to drain every single bit of energy out of me? Okay, if that's a yes, then the answer has to be a no. Or is this something that somebody's going to help me with? That might be a yes. But you have to put yourself first when you're setting that no boundary. And I'm telling you, no is a complete sentence. It really is. It's hard to use unless you practice with yourself or a spouse or a friend. Talk to yourself in the mirror. It's a confidence builder. For me, like I said, because I'm later in my career, I don't really have a problem saying no, because there's certain things I just don't want to do. But for people that are probably in their 20s to 50s, put yourself first. Think about, is this going to affect you? Is it going to affect your family? Is it going to affect your free time? Is it going to be a energy suck? If it's an energy suck, then it is always a no, because you need to focus that energy in on yourself so that you can enjoy the things that life has to offer. Right? If you are an hourly person and somebody asks you to work overtime, do you need the money? If you don't need the money, don't take the overtime, because eventually the more you keep saying yes, the more they're going to come to you and expect you to say yes. If you are with a family member and they literally suck the fun out of everything and the joy out of everything and the energy out of everything, it's always going to be a no, right? Because you need that energy and that fun in your own life to make you smile, to make you laugh. I don't know, just to feel better. Because, like Pearl said, life is freaking short, right? We don't get unlimited days on Earth, right? We don't get unlimited days of joy. I can tell you from my own experience, like when I was in that super dark place, like I didn't do any of that, right? Like I would let it, my energy got sucked out of me every day with conversations. Being an empath sucked on top of that because I took on everybody else's problems. And the inside, all I wanted to do was die. Negative self talk all day long. You're stupid. You need to do this, blah, blah, blah. That's another thing. No more negative self talk because that is a total energy suck on so many levels. And, be nicer to yourself. Offer yourself patience and grace. And that's what I had to do. Offer myself patience and grace and realize I'm not perfect and that my brain's a little messed up and that I'm okay. It's okay to have a kind of a messy brain because I think it makes me a better person.
I love that you said that it's okay to have a messy brain. I love that. It's so true. I love, I'm the same way with energy suck. If it's going to suck the energy out of me, I'm like, it's got to be a no. I mean, I was such a yes person that you probably could have asked me to come help clean up the dog mess in your backyard. I'd be like, yeah, because I don't want to let you down. Let me go help you. Let me get my shovel and help you do that too, and I realized that, the saying no. And I share the story how for me, I took this 6-week course of identity and destiny. At the end of the 6 weeks, we had to give our I am statement. And I was still saying I was all my titles, mom, wife, all these things. And, and growing up, I never liked my name. I mean, it's a beautiful name. I'm the third generation of the Pearl, and it's Pearl Ellen, which, saying that out loud used to be like, oh, I can't stand it. Right. But I realized as I was going on this journey to figure out who I was, my name it was chosen for a reason, it was chosen for two people before me, carried that name. And so I decided to go on this journey and I found this rock on the ground. I was like, I picked up this rock. I didn't know why, it's like, okay, God, I'm going to put this rock in my pocket, but okay. And then I happened to go to an event that afternoon and somebody had asked me to do something around animals. And I love my dogs. I like cats, but I don't want to fundraise for either one of them, And so I remember my hand sort of like swiped my pocket where this rock was, and I was like, no. And I was like, oh wait, I didn't mean to say it that way. Like it just came out, like it came out, and the person looked at me and go, no. I mean, no, it's not a good fit for me. I just can't help you with that, right? And so as I went on this journey, I was like, okay, what's the deal with this rock? And I just realized I was saying yes to so many things that I just wasn't showing up for me. And so I made a commitment to start saying no to something 3 times in a day. So at least I could start showing up for myself. And as I was doing that, that's where the word Shiro comes for me. I became stronger in saying no. I became less guilty and going, oh my God, they're going to think I don't like them. I suck. I was like, no, it's no, that's it. No, I can't do it. And then I found myself being happier because I wasn't stressed out because I forgot to do something for somebody. And I'm waking up at 2:00 in the morning going, oh, I'm going to go do that project because I forgot to send them that piece of paper or whatever, a spreadsheet or PowerPoint. And then I started becoming this empowered person going, if I'm feeling this way, I'm not the only one that feels this way. So I need to get this message out that we can say no and be happy about it. And that it is a complete sentence, like what you were saying. And then I found that as I was doing that, I started walking into rooms. People were like, what's different about you? I called it the radiant glow up. I had this different glow about me. Like, did you cut your hair? Did you lose weight? No, I'm just happier. I'm not saying yes to everything. And truly what happened was I became that original person I was supposed to be. Like I said earlier when we were talking, I wanted to be a teacher, but I didn't go to school to be a teacher, but I originally that was something I wanted to educate. So I started educating people and I started holding retreats and started coaching my clients. And it's like this little movement that's taken a slow little wave, across the world to say, you can show up for yourself and still be there for others, and one of the things I found was I wasn't taking time for me to do things that let me sit still. So we bought our house, we downsized our house 4 years ago. And one of the things I wanted, we got this front porch. So I got a front porch swing. So I'll go outside. Some mornings I might journal. Some mornings I might just sit up there. I might fall back to sleep out there. Right. And so I found that those things were making me happier. And so it's like you said, it's like fine, like you said, you go outside and you get grounded with the earth. 7 months out of the year you don't have snow. You can put your feet in the grass and enjoy that little piece of the grass that's there and let it ground you. And I think if you're listening to us, I think that's something I would love to see you take away from today's episode is do something that lets you be back to nature or lets you have some quiet time for yourself. That just think about what it is that you want. What have you kind of put in the shelf because you showed up for your kids, you showed up for your spouse, you showed up for your partner, whatever that is. Like, what are you doing that you're not putting you first? And what have you put on the shelf? Because as we said, and I live it every day with not having our oldest son here anymore, is like, we're not promised tomorrow. And I always get my clients with this one. I always say to them, okay, think about it this way. If tomorrow doesn't come for you and all your family and friends could say what they saw you do for yourself, if each person couldn't say something different, you need to be working on that because you don't want them all to say the same thing because then that means you just worked on one thing. Let them all say something different. If you can't, I want to talk with you. I want to coach you on that because I want them to say various things about what they saw you do. And some of it can be volunteering. It doesn't mean you give up those things. Like you were saying earlier, we're not saying give up the things that bring you happy energy. If you like volunteering and raising stuff for dogs and cats, go for it, But if you don't, what is it? What is that thing? And I think it's so important that we remember that, Gretchen. What are your thoughts on that?
It's so important. And, there's other things you can do for yourself. Do you like to draw? Do you like to doodle around? Do you like to crochet? Those are all things that can bring you joy. Art therapy is another great thing. And I dabble in it. There's sometimes I'll be on a work meeting and I'll just doodle because it brings me a little bit of joy and it brings a little smile to my face. And I don't know what I colored and I don't care because nobody else is going to see it but me. But it made me happy. But if you have to say no, be respectful when you do it, right? Like, don't be a jerk because no. But also remember that you have your own stuff going on, whether it's home, work, your kids, your friends, your family. Think of you first, because that's one thing we all don't do. We don't think of us first. We think of everything else that needs to get done, all our friends, our family, our work, all those external things. But look internally into yourself and say, hey, what do I need to make me feel good? Because at the end of the day, that's all you have.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing too is if you don't do you take care of you first, you can't be there for all those other ones, like what we're saying and everything. And that's a great reminder. I want to talk about empath. We hear people hear about empath. So tell the listeners that maybe you've heard that for the first time. I mean, I'm familiar with empath, but tell everybody, like, what is it to be an empath and how, because now you're talking about boundaries, right? And you talked about how being an empath, how you can take other people's stuff far. How are you doing with separating those when that needs to be separated?
Well, that was a hard one because I had to set boundaries, right? So I used to get involved in everybody's drama, right? Like the stuff that was going on in their lives, parents that were sick, kids that weren't acting right, colleagues whose customers were, not being helpful or considerate. And I would offer myself up and be like, hey, I can take that on for you, right? And let me take away some of that pain. Well, that's all well and good if you're in a good headspace. But for me, October, November, December, I was in a horrible headspace. And so I was taking all that pain and sadness on away from them and trying to help them, but I wasn't helping myself. So if you are an empath, one of the things you can do is prioritize how much of yourself you want to give to that person, right? How much of their stuff do you want to take on as your own? Because a lot of what we do is stuff that we can't fix, right? But we want to take away their pain and their hurt and their anger, and we can't do that. But we can still be a friend. But there were a couple of friends that like we're not friends anymore because I refused to give my all to them because I was taking back 90% of that for myself. And they didn't understand that because, for years and years and years, I was always the person they could come to and dump on. Well, you get to a point in your life where you don't want to be dumped on anymore. And I'm happier because of that, because now I feel freer, right? And I can deal with my own emotions and have my own thoughts and be more present with myself and the people around me. Because when everything was going down, I wasn't very present with anybody, because I was so scattered taking on everybody else's stuff. And so that's what being an empath is we take on everything. Okay. We are really in tune with people's emotions, not so much in tune with our own, but with everybody else's. And we always want to help, but there are certain things that we can't help with and that we need to turn that empath around and make it a shield so that some of that gets pushed back out onto the person that you're being empathetic with. Some people will get it, a lot of people don't.
I like you said, put that shield up. We have to have that shield. It's kind of like that boundary shield. We have to have that shield up because you're right. We can take on everybody's stuff and then it can send us down, like you share what happened to you. And, that's something you want to avoid. And the thing too is I will ask for help. It's like, my husband's a great listener. If I feel like, what, a family member or something's taken too much, and I'll be like, hey, I need you to let me talk this out and help me, set the boundary and, and I'll ask for help. And because, I don't want, I'm so proud of my boundaries. I remember really when, I took that identity and destiny course, but before that course is when my parents had divorced. And it was like almost 20 years ago. And I remember I went to this church retreat at our church for the weekend, and we got to spend some time with the pastor. And I was telling him, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm a 7-year-old. Here I was, like I was 20 years ago. So I was 37. And I was like, I feel like I'm like a 7-year-old at 37 years old because I got my parents trying to, pick sides, and you got to pick mommy or daddy's side. And I remember him looking at me, and Gretchen, this has sat with me my entire rest of my life. I share this with everybody I work with. One of the things he said, he's like, Pearl, we don't pick our parents. God picks our parents. We will always love them, but that doesn't mean they have to be in your ball game of life. You can put the boundaries on. And like I think you said earlier in the episode, is like you can open the fence gate if you want to for a little bit and let them come play for a little bit. And if they still can't follow the rules, then they go sit back on the bench. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I was like, I remember leaving that weekend going, okay, because a people pleaser me was like, oh, they're your parents, and it's funny because I said earlier how I've divorced my parents, and I've had people go, well, they're your mom and your dad. I'm like, I look at them and I go, okay, let me put it to you this way. I've been with Chuck for 40 years, almost. If Charles had been doing something like this behavior, this narcissist gaslighting behavior, would you tell me to stay with him all those years? And they just look at me because they're like going, oh, I get it. And so the reason why I say that is that we talk about boundaries, talk about having stuff around who's sucking our energy. You're going to put boundaries around people you never thought you would have to, and don't let anybody guilt you, because the guilt that I kind of felt for a little bit there was heavy, and don't let them guilt you into why, because you only know why you have the boundaries. And like I said, they're going to say things, the other person's going to say things and try to make it sound like, all this drama, but you're just being quiet, and that's fine, and when people ask me, I'm just like, I've done it because it's what's best for my health and my wellness, and I'm okay with it, so I'm glad we've had this conversation on this. And again, if you're listening to us and you are somebody who's struggling with any of this, Gretchen, tell them the number again. Pick up the call.
So you can reach out to, in US and Canada, you can text or call 988, and anywhere else in the world, use findahelpline.com. It lists out every crisis line number in like all the countries.
Awesome. Yeah. So definitely, reach out like we're saying today. I want to switch to the name of your show. I think it's such a fun name. And I know we've talked about, some of the stuff. And for the listeners who don't know, tell everybody what the name of your podcast is.
So the name of our podcast is Shit That Goes On in Our Heads.
And tell us how you picked the name.
So Dirty Skittles and I were trying to figure out like what name we could use that would the Apple police and the Spotify police would let us use, because you can't say certain names on those platforms. But we talked about it because we all have shit that goes on in our heads, and at the time, I had a lot of shit going on in my head, and I didn't know how to get it out. So we thought, let's name the show that, so that when we're talking about it, this is how we're getting that shit out of our head. And, normalizing that conversation and giving people an outlet, because I think that some people feel stuck because they don't have an outlet to share their emotions with, right? They maybe don't have enough money to go to therapy, or they're in a tough situation at home, or work sucks and they don't know how to talk to their boss. The guests that come on our show have all kind of been through this, and they give everybody tips and tricks on how to make life a little bit more manageable with your mental health. And my brain's messy. I am not shy about that. Anybody that asks me about why we did the podcast, I am very honest. It started from a very dark place, but it grew into this amazing monster that brings me a ton of joy.
I think it's a fun name. I think it definitely says, because there is so much stuff that, like you said, there's so much shit that we have in our head, and we allow the judging, we allow the sabotaging for everything. Like, whether you're a people pleaser or you're a stickler, everything has to be a certain way. Like, it doesn't all have to be a certain way. What if it just wasn't? Are you going to be okay with it, right? Or you have to control things. Like, you have to control all the outcome, right? So you don't have to control it. What if you let somebody else take the reins for a little bit, and you just sat back and you just enjoyed life, right? But all that stuff that goes on our head tells, no, they can't do it better than me. Well, they're not going to do the same as you, but they might bring something different to the table, and so we have all that, like you said, all that stuff, all that shit that's in our head. I love that you named it that show. So you guys, you do this show, you release it every week, right?
Yep. Every Tuesday at 3 a.m. because we do have listeners all over the world.
Right. And it's on all the platforms. But we're going to put the link and everything to the show for everybody. And but tell everybody how they can find you outside of just the podcast.
So you can actually go out to our website. It's goesonourheads.net. All our episodes are out there. We have some blog posts. You can see any of the articles I've written, or any articles written about us. If you ever have a question for us, there's a little button in the bottom corner where you can click it and leave us a voicemail. We love to hear from our listeners. And if you've listened to the podcast, you'll notice that it feels like a bunch of friends just sitting around the campfire shooting the shit. We are 100% organic. Nothing is ever scripted. And we get as much out of it as our listeners do and as our guests do. It's like free therapy.
I know. I love doing my podcast and everything. It's a lot of fun. I love being on other people's podcasts too, because it's just the conversations that happen. And I'm like you. I'm not scripted. I don't have, as you can see, Gretchen, I don't have questions. People ask me, I'm like, if you need questions ahead of time, I'm not the podcast for you, because we're just going to see what happens. We're going to have a conversation and see where it goes. So I just how it is. What is your favorite? I know you talk about art therapy and things like that. If you could only pick one thing to do the rest of your life that is self-care, what would that thing be for you?
Be in nature.
Do you have a favorite place to go in nature besides your yard?
I really love the mountains. And so there's three: a sunrise, a sunset, or the mountains.
I love sunrise and sunset. I love the mountains too. I'm actually going to Reno for Thanksgiving. I think my nephew's going to take me skiing, so we'll see how well I do. I'm not a big skier, but I'm like, okay, I'll try it with you. But I'm a big beach person. I love the sunrise and sunset on the beach. If I could do both in one day, but I have a friend who lives in here in Florida, and I tell him he's got this condo on the beach. It's across the street from the beach, but his back window sees the sunrise, and he walks across the street and watches the sunset. I'm like, that's just like the most beautiful thing in the world to be able to enjoy in your life. I just think it's a powerful thing. Okay, so we're going to put all the links and how to reach you and everything on there. I am going to shuffle our cards. So I forewarned Gretchen that we have our cards that we do. So I'm going to shuffle them. She's going to tell me when to stop, and then we're going to have you answer the question. So here we go.
Stop.
All right. So Gretchen's question is, what is success? What is success to you?
Success to me is knowing that I've done everything in my power to do the right thing for a customer or for myself, and not taking all the credit for it, but sharing that credit with everyone, with where it's due.
I love that you said that, because that's so important to, like, knowing that at the end of the day, when I put my bed to head, my head to bed, I know that I've done the best that I can do in that day, taking care of my clients the best I can. For my son's wedding, on the guest list, one of the people that we had come down, his name is Jim Macklin. And Jim, if you're listening, I'm calling you out. And I'm trying not to say he was my former boss, because he's like, I was never your boss. We were a teammate, right? And we really were. We were part of a team. He yes, did he own the company, of course, but he made us feel like we are all part of the company. We all had something to share, something to add to the company, and so that was for me. I did a post after the wedding, and with some pictures of him and I together, and I said in that post, have that one person that can impact and make a change in your life. But how about also being that person that can make a change and impact in somebody's life? And he's not on Facebook, so his kids saw it and they sent it to him. And I sent a video to him. I did it on TikTok as well. And it's like, he called me and he said, the one thing he said to me is like, you are so genuine. He's like, you're always genuine. You've never changed in the 20 some years I've known you. I mean, I've been here for 20 years. I worked from 13. So we've known each other over 30 years. In the 30 some years that we've known each other, it's like, you always been genuine. You've never wavered from who you are. And you inspire and empower. And for me, that's success. I want people to remember. That's a legacy I want people to remember, is that I figured out who the heck Pearl was. I loved my name again. I found a way to love my name again. But I also found a way to take this message and put it out to the world, so other people wouldn't feel like they're alone, like they had no hope. And I feel like what you're doing, Gretchen, is exactly that. What you guys are putting out there, you sharing your story, you're allowing others to see that it's okay to not be okay. And we want you to get help. There's ways you can get help, the phone number and things like that. But it's okay. It's also okay to ask for help. It's also okay to date your therapist. I like that too. I like date your therapist, but it's okay to do that, because in the end, your Shiro story matters, and we want to know, and we want to be part and see that Shiro story come to fruition here, and for us all to pay it forward to somebody else. And Gretchen, I just want to thank you for what you're doing. I want to thank you for you paying it forward. I want to thank you for being on this episode with me today as well.
You're so welcome. I love this. I do have one question. Is there a green card in there?
A green card?
Yeah, pick out a green card. That's my favorite color.
Pick out a green card. Oh, here's a green card. You want me to tell you? Let me ask you the question.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a good one. What would it be like if it was easy?
I think it would be boring.
I agree.
because I think that, being in life, right, you have to try different things to find the things that bring you joy. And yes, an easy button would be amazing. I let me tell you, January 1st, 2023, I wish I could have pressed that easy button, because I was afraid of all that hard work I'd have to put in. But all the hard work I put in made me a better person. So I don't think we should have an easy button. I think we should have to work for it so that we could see the fruits of our labor.
Oh my God. There's so many ways that conversation could go if we had more time. But I agree with you 100%. We shouldn't have an easy button because it, I really believe, like what you said, if you had an easy button, you wouldn't be who you are today, right? It's so true. So again, I can't wait for everybody to listen to this episode. I can't wait to, I'm in your show sometime next year. It's on my calendar. So I'm so excited, but I just want to remind everybody that's listening today, make sure you go like and follow our show, whether you're listening on podcast platforms or you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe below. And remember that you come into this world, you are a little rough oyster on the outside, but as you don't push your easy button and as you start doing the work inside, you find your inner pearl of greatness. And I hope today we've inspired and empowered you to go find your inner pearl of greatness. Have an amazing day.